space terrorism is here, and it's surging. This isn't just theory, it's cyber attacks, signal jamming, GPS spoofing, and even kinetic strikes against orbital assets.
As the world moves online and into orbit, the threat of space terrorism is no longer science fiction.
Our entire world runs on space.
From GPS and the internet to bank transactions and even military defences, much of our modern world relies on satellites.
Rogue states and extremist groups see this as a new, high-impact pressure point. It's cheaper than ever to launch an attack that could cripple an economy.
When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, a second and unprecedented battle got underway.
That's when tens of thousands of commercial satellite modems started going down across Ukraine and Europe.
Websites have been taken down and defaced, private data stolen, broadcasts hijacked.
Experts investigate if the satellite has fallen victim to a Chinese cyber attack.
Maybe somebody hacked the satellite, hacked the behaviors of the satellite, causing it to go haywire.
Governments on either side are working with these armies of vigilante hackers, unleashing forces that they might not be able to control.
It was the biggest outage of satellite internet on record, but it turns out it might not be the last. Space systems are far more hackable than many realise, and with the number of satellites set to rise from 5,000 today to 100,000 in the next few years, cyber attacks are only likely to get worse.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, space terrorism. Yes, the next battleground for global security may not be on Earth, but above it, as satellites control everything from navigation and banking to weather forecasting and military operations, experts warn that space is now a target for terrorism, and we are ill-prepared.
So it's no longer a question whether space terrorism, I think, occurs, but how we as an international community respond when it does. And if we don't have those clear rules, if we don't have accountability mechanisms, corporate strategies between states and also between states and space companies, do we actually run the risk of actually turning the final frontier into the next battlefield?
That's Anna-Marie Brennan, a law lecturer at Waikato University, who's been researching outer space law and governance for the past 7 years. She says space activity has opened the door to innovation, but also to vulnerability, and warns that the current legal frameworks aren't equipped to respond.
But we're seeing a number of incidents emerging where very quickly us experts are starting to realise that we need a legal framework to try and combat it. So, for example, in March 2022, Network Battalion, also known as NB65, a group affiliated with Anonymous, allegedly hacked the Russian civilian space agency Roscosmos in protest at Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
This is a message to Vladimir Putin from Anonymous.
The group calls itself Anonymous, unaffiliated hackers around the world now putting Russia in the crosshairs.
Members of Anonymous have declared cyber war against your aggressive regime.
They claim they've already targeted more than 1,500 Russian websites, including Kremlin-controlled news agencies, the Ministry of Defense and Space Agency, Russian oil companies, internet providers, even TV channels.
And then a couple of months ago, many people will know that actually Russia allegedly targeted the EU chief's plane by allegedly jamming GPS signals.
Russia has been accused of attempted sabotage after the navigation system failed on a plane which was carrying the President of the European Commission. Ursula von der Leyen was on her way to Bulgaria yesterday when the GPS stopped working, forcing the pilot to use paper maps to land.
So this is a problem that is very much on the rise worldwide. We've seen a number of instances where states have raised concerns about security threats against space infrastructure. But again, our laws are not catching up at all. And there's a considerable vacuum. And we're reaching a point now of no return. If we don't adopt laws, if we don't have some sort of mechanism at the international level to ensure accountability, to engage in monitoring, we could see actually quite a severe attack on space-based infrastructure. And of course, this infrastructure is vital for everyday life on Earth, from climate and environmental monitoring to giving us the heads up if there's a bad weather front on the way, to our business and finance communications, even to help us respond to and monitor disasters. We need satellites to enable us to do all these activities. So very much so, if we don't have that legal framework, if we don't have those protections in place, what experts fear is a rise in terrorist activities against this infrastructure.
And the moment a satellite is hacked, jammed or destroyed, the impact has the potential to ripple across economies, national security, basically every part of our life.
We need satellites to send TV signals directly to our homes, and they form the backbone of cable and TV. When we get on a long-haul flight, we need satellites to provide in-flight phone communications and Wi-Fi. Even when we sit into our cars, we need satellite-based navigation systems to get from A to B. And even if we look more broadly than that again, for business and finance, communication satellites can rapidly communicate between a number of widely dispersed locations. And of course, that's a pivotal tool for allowing big manufacturing companies and department stores even to perform inventory management, provide instant credit card authorization, automated teller banking service to even small towns, pay at the pump gas of freeway gas stations, video conferencing for even big international corporations. And then again, even as we've seen recently in New Zealand, where we've been barraged by quite bad weather, it is satellites that have provided meteorologists with the ability to see weather on a global scale, enabling them to follow the impact of weather fronts, but also other phenomena like volcanic eruptions, burning gas and oil fields, to even the development of large systems like hurricanes, as we've seen in Jamaica and in the Caribbean more recently. And I suppose if we think about even further, for scientists that are monitoring climate change and the environment, satellites really provide that best source of information and data to help inform their research. And basically, satellites help us monitor ocean temperatures, prevailing currents. They help us as well show how sea level is rising has had an impact on land. And of course, if we have disasters, now of course we know New Zealand is particularly prone to disasters.
Cyclone Hale promised massive flooding, slips and destruction of property, and it delivered on the east coast with a vengeance.
Well, in the words of its mayor, Gabrielle is the most catastrophic weather event to hit Wairoa in living memory.
Those satellites help humanitarian relief organisations and states to understand what is the scale of that disaster, whether it be an earthquake or a volcanic eruption, or as we've seen even 20 years ago with Hurricane Katrina in the United States. Data provided by satellites helps those organisations and states to manage and respond in the aftermath of disasters and provide humanitarian relief.
Gosh, huge. So in all parts of our lives.
Exactly. And according to the UN's Office for Outer Space Affairs, there's approximately 10,000 satellites in orbit around us. And that number is growing year on year. And they are state satellites, they are corporate satellites. And where is the law in all of this? And what experts are very concerned about is the space industry is advancing at a considerable rate, but law is really falling behind. And with the sheer number of satellites that we have in orbit and our big reliance on them to go about our everyday lives, why is it that we haven't been able to provide protections legally for that critical infrastructure?
Can I get you to explain exactly what laws are in place right now and what laws you'd like to see in place?
Well, we have 5 outer space treaties at the international level, but of course they were crafted at a time when only a handful of states had access to orbit. And those treaties provide that states are responsible for activity in outer space, they're supposed to have a duty to monitor corporate activity in outer space. But again, countries like New Zealand have a very strong legal framework. If you want to launch anything from our soil, you need to have a license from the minister. But, not all countries have that legal framework. They don't monitor very well what space companies are doing within their territory. So very much so, the UN and other international organizations only starting now to realize that, actually, we need to be careful here. There are potential threats to this infrastructure. It is critical for our everyday life here on Earth. We need to perhaps put something now in place. And we're starting to see experts thinking whether trust and confidence building measures could be implemented, whether that might be one avenue to develop trust and cooperation, not only among states, but non-state actors like corporations such as Rocket Lab or SpaceX or Gilmore Technologies. But at the same time, those data sharing agreements really remain difficult to negotiate due to national security concerns. So I think experts over several years will be trying to explore how can we support states to craft law to address space terrorism? How do we try and prevent this from happening? Firstly, but how do we hold those to account who engage in this type of activity and criminal behaviour? How do we define an act of terrorism in space? How do we establish protocols for incident reporting and determining liability for attacks on commercial and civilian infrastructure? Even at the moment, at the international level, there is no duty for companies to report on that their infrastructure may have been targeted, for example, in a jamming attack. There is no responsibility whatsoever. So actually, as experts, we understand that there are these security concerns, but actually we don't know how serious it is. What we do know is that space terrorism is no longer a theoretical concern. We know it exists. So, for example, as I mentioned, the alleged attack on Roscosmos, where NB65 alleged that it had actually gained control of some of Russia's satellites. It's a tangible threat. It has real-world implications. And what we see as well with the outer space industry is that it's companies that are leading the way. It's no longer states. And that line between state and non-state actors becomes quite blurred as well when you have space agencies like NASA that are outsourcing a lot of their exploration activity to companies like SpaceX. So again, private companies are taking on that larger role in outer space exploration. And then we need to really think carefully about how we adopt a robust, adaptable legal framework to try and protect that infrastructure. So it's no longer a question whether space terrorism, I think, occurs, but how we as an international community respond when it does. And if we don't have those clear rules, if we don't have accountability mechanisms, corporate strategies between states and also between states and space companies, do we actually run the risk of actually turning the final frontier into the next battlefield?
The final frontier is officially the new front line.
Everybody's at risk, which is why at the end of the day, they need to take the step to protect their systems, their networks, and their data. This can happen to anyone. There is no one that is immune from potentially getting hacked.
Indeed, with NB65's alleged attack on Russian satellite infrastructure, Russian officials declared this is a cause for war. So again, the key concern amongst experts is how do we ensure that outer space exploration remains peaceful? And it's been quite peaceful so far, but how do we ensure that continues?
For how much longer? So we're clear, if they do hack or take out satellites, what is that fallout for, say, if they do it over New Zealand, do it over the world? What's worst case scenario?
From remote communities, they could use their Wi-Fi access. So, for example, we know for many remote communities in India, they are heavily reliant on satellite technology to gain access to consultations with medical doctors, for example. And also children in those remote communities, they are taught remotely, and that's via satellite, essentially. But also, there's other crucial concerns as well. I mean, the EU chief's plane was interfered with. That could set that plane off course, could cause a lot of confusion about how that plane gets from A to B. So it's a health and safety issue.
This might seem like a dumb question, so forgive me in advance, but how easy is it to hack or target a satellite in 2025?
Well, basically, about 25 years ago, a UK-based satellite was allegedly hacked and moved out of its orbit. And British authorities have remained very tight-lipped about actually whether this satellite moved or not. But experts widely believe that this did occur, and it's alleged that the individual that did this was based in southeast England. So just one lone individual was able to hack this infrastructure and move it. So 25 years ago, it would have been quite easy. Over the last 10 to 15 years, we haven't seen a major security breach. But again, if we look at Roscosmos and NB65's alleged takeover of their satellites, it would seem it's not actually that difficult. And even if we look at the war in Ukraine, Russia allegedly hacked a number of satellites in southeastern Europe that are critical for providing Wi-Fi access. So, well, certainly for someone like me that's not tech savvy, I certainly wouldn't be able to do it. But where there's a will, there's a way. And I think moving forward, as the number of satellites being launched increases exponentially, there is a strong likelihood that we will see more of these attacks.
And do you think these attacks, these space attacks, could they ever sort of be considered an act of war?
Well, that is certainly what Russia thought 3 years ago. We had a senior official in Roscosmos, Dmitry Rogozin, who declared that disabling another country's satellites could be considered a cause for war. So what we have seen in the past as well, countries blowing up their satellites that they've decided to decommission. And again, that has led to a lot of concerns about the regulation of satellite activity. Other concerns that are emerging in the outer space realm, satellites themselves could be weaponized. And there's a lot of concern about what type of payloads companies themselves are launching into outer space and whether some of those payloads could be actually militarized. So when you have Russia coming out and saying that if you target our satellites, this is a cause for war, I think this is something that the international community needs to sit up and say, okay, we need some legal architecture here, a legal framework to navigate how we respond to this.
And for those who say, look, we're in little old New Zealand, we're safe, we're all far away from that, what do you say?
New Zealand is a big player in the outer space industry. Even some of the technology that will be used for some of the first asteroid mining ventures into outer space has been designed here and manufactured here in New Zealand on the South Island. And as well as that, components of the James Webb telescope were manufactured here in New Zealand. And that's something New Zealanders should be really proud about. In 2016, we had a burgeoning industry. And in the space of 8-9 years, it has propelled literally up the table to two-third, as being the third largest player in the world. And obviously, the space industry here supports around, according to some reports, nearly 40,000 jobs. So while New Zealand might think it's a small player, it is not. It is a key player. And indeed, as what we've seen emerging recently is New Zealand propelling itself forward to try and find solutions to some of these issues. So, for example, New Zealand recently signed an agreement with the UK with regards how do we respond to issues like space debris. How do we ensure that we don't pollute outer space with our old satellites, for example? So again, New Zealand is a key player, and with a growing industry and indeed some of its own concerns about security, New Zealand has been trying to respond in the wake of some of those concerns.
She says as we quickly reach a point of no return, trust and confidence building matters must become the priority.
If we don't update our outer space laws soon, we are going to be in a considerable vacuum. And as we see ventures towards establishing a nuclear reactor on the moon and conducting asteroid mining and actually returning humans to the moon next year, if we don't have robust laws and if we don't have transparency and confidence building measures, is there a danger that the mistakes that we have made here on Earth with regards to the protection of the environment, are we going to replicate those same mistakes in outer space?
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Anna Marie Brennan. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Jeremy Ansell. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.